Hello, everybody. Here we are on the bonus session 4. And this one is titled Practical Application, where I'm going to share a little bit of my own journey. And generally, a lot of people share this stuff at the beginning, but I saved it for the end because in some ways I've introduced bits and pieces of it in the first 3 sessions. But here you'll understand how that fits into my story. To start, and I do share some of this in here, when I married an abusive person, and this was an emotional, spiritual, and verbal abuser, he didn't touch me. I think probably one of the only reasons he never did is because he knew I could probably beat him up, number one. I have 7 brothers, okay? So I learned a few things growing up on how to deal with interesting brothers that do boy things. And the other thing is he knew in his mind that physical abuse was not good. But he had been so horribly abused himself as a child that never got over some of that trauma, that I think that contributed to some of his mindsets. And I can't diagnose what some of his issues are. I haven't seen him in 20 years, so I don't know. But people think, why in the heck did I marry somebody like that? Well, I'm not really sure. Abusive people can really be tricky to figure out. And I'd asked some very pertinent questions before I married him, and he gave me answers that I accepted, but they weren't the truth. Now, if you are in a situation like that, I highly recommend that you read my book, But Words Will Never Hurt Me. So, and I tell that story from a position of all the journals. I basically just went through my journals and plopped that stuff into a book because I had exact words and exact conversations between him written down, which at the end of the conversation, I would say, "Is this what you just said?" And he would say, "Yes." Then 2 days later, he would say, "I never said that. You wrote it down wrong." I mean, that's called crazy making and gaslighting. And so all I did was simply put in the conversations into the book and allow the reader to make up their own mind what is going on. So if you have an abusive partner, an abusive boss, abusive parents, or other family members, then that would be a good book for you to work through, because there's going to be some trauma associated with that. And you might have grown up with that. I mean, if you have parents that were alcoholics or drug addicts or any of those things, you're going to be dealing with some of those same kinds of things, because I have yet to meet a smart drunk person. I mean, all the way through marching band in college, I saw enough of it that I'm like, why waste good money on getting sick? So I never did it. And I wasn't one of those people who did stuff like that, but I was much more focused on my career than I was getting drunk every weekend, which seemed to be a really big thing to do in college way back in the day. I think it still is. But at the same point, that whole situation of being married did not have a good effect on me. Then all of a sudden, I had a spiritual awakening, even though I was a very spiritual person beforehand. But I understood it in my head, but my heart didn't. You have to have a brain heart coherence working there. So much of it was up here, but not enough of it was in the heart yet. And so that's all of the work that we've been doing in this class is to bring the brain and the heart into a coherence so that they work together. That's why I talk about the heart garden exercises and all of these other things, getting the imagination to work the way it's supposed to. I basically shut my imagination down, which we should never do. I mean, how many times have we told a kid, "Oh, that's just in your imagination"? And then you look at some of the crazy stuff going on in the world now, and kids say crazy things, and you're like, well, they're just imagining things. I mean, I had kids come up to me and say the craziest things when I was teaching. I was elementary music teacher for a while, so kindergartners can say some really interesting things to you. And you just have to go with the flow. And anyway, with that, I think we're just going to go ahead and go on into the story. And as I tell some of this stuff, if there's some things that resonate with you, then you might want to consider revising or changing or making some additions to your benches of three. Because if you've dealt with any kind of abuse or gaslighting or crazy stuff, sorry, my hair is falling apart, with people in your life, then that might still be affecting the way you're functioning now. And I honestly can say, if I were to see my husband face to face, I don't think I'd be fearful. I wouldn't be mad, nothing. I actually feel sorry for him because he's not had a good life since then. And anyway, on that note, we're going to share screen. And I think we are looking for number 4, practical application. Share. Let's do from the very beginning. Okay, you all want to sing along with me? Let's start at the very beginning. And the curtain draws back. And we all get to see the words. And I put my link, Healing Frequencies music, up there because that is what started this whole process for me, was this website. I have several of them. I have several others, depending on what it is I'm doing. But there it is right there. And you can also Google my name. I have DelHungerford.com, by the way. And as before, the video session link will be posted here in the PDF. And there's the challenge website link. So all of the things that you guys post as modalities, I will add those as links on the challenge page, the web page, so that they're there forever. Even though I will take it off my main website. I mean, right now I have an advertisement to it on the main page. I will take that off. So as long as you keep this link, you'll have access to that page. All right. You've seen this slide before, but some key points. I'm going to tell my story and what I've learned that can help you. And this is how methods of moving forward. And then, of course, homework. We love homework. And these are some examples of where I started. Okay. This first picture was taken in 2009. I built my first door shed, and I think I was pretty tired on that picture. And here I am. This was actually at the end of it. Here we were just starting it. And this is teaching. This was in my office, and my students had made a sign that said no weenies, because I always say, don't play like a weenie. And that was around Christmas. I always came and wore those cheesy antlers all the time, every Christmas, because I'm just goofy. My healing took nearly 20 years. It required my willingness to see the emotional roots that were attached to physical symptoms. I hope you've looked over that chart. If you have not, please do so. And you might find some interesting things on it. Why so long, and how did I do it? That's what I'm going to explain in here. I learned to let go of unhealthy paradigms by resonating with the frequency of mindset changes. That's all in the book, Transforming Mindsets. And Maturing as a Mystic, there's a bunch of stories in there as well. But as I'm going through this, I've written several books in the process, showing people what I was doing. So if you go to my author page, which is on a couple of the other slides, you'll see. This is where I was in 2010. I had an illness, much like chronic fatigue, that lasted for 19 years, that began during the abusive marriage. I had no clue how to hear from God, despite coming from a word of faith background. You know what word of faith is? That is where you're really stepping into understanding, and they're very much into the power of your words. And I understood that, but somehow I lost track of it during the marriage. I had very little self-confidence because I believed the lies. I had a friend who told me, you had a part to play. I'm like, I didn't make him abuse me. But my part was I believed the lies. I couldn't get past the illness and thought I was stuck in a never-ending life cycle. I knew God had something different, but I didn't know how to access that truth because I was stuck in a cycle of negativity. I had a part to play in the failed marriage. I was about to get revelation on how to use the circumstance for a new level of maturity. I failed miserably. through the entire marriage, as far as my mindset, really reversed pretty much everything. Everything was stripped away. I would have never guessed, with the strong personality that I was, that I allowed that to happen. And yes, I allowed it to happen. And I allowed it to happen because I came into agreement with the lies. And I call it my kingdom journey because I had to understand things from a higher spiritual perspective. This is where the spiritual awakening. So in 2010, I read a book that's called If This Were a Dream, What Would It Mean by Murray Dewick. And there's a link at the end. That helped me understand how the prophetic works. Then I attended many conferences that presented outside the box methods of thinking, of reframing mindset, seeing things from outside a standard religious atmosphere. And I guess you could say more mystical thinking. It's not getting rid of those things. It's just adding another dimension to it, understanding the bigger picture. And here's the thing, I practiced daily, even when I saw zero results at first, because I understand the power of practice. I knew there was change when things that used to trigger me eventually had little or no effect. In 2024, I'm creating spontaneous music, not as easy for classical musicians. I mean, it took me a while to get there, but I had to realize that I could do it. My classical training said I couldn't, but I said I can. I fully understand there's a partnership with Creator where I co-create in all I do. I've written several books about my journey. I'm now training others what to do, which is what I do, basically, which is what you're seeing right now. I keep expanding creative methods of functioning every year. It never stops. There's always more layers. There we go. Let that fly off. My journey began with a thought. We're going back to this. My thoughts. I accepted my thoughts that floated down the thought river. When I was married, they were all negative. Then I framed negative intents, which brought negative actions. And the result was I got sick. This was the negative part of it. Once I reframed the mindsets, I accepted the positive thoughts, what God said about me. I framed those thoughts into decrees and into various exercises. I mean, I have books full of exercises that I created, and I do. I listen to teachings and I create all kinds of cool stuff. And that's the action part. And the result is I was healed physically. And I always say everything I learned in life, I learned as a classical musician. And nothing in life that we've ever done is wasted. Even though I'm not actively professionally playing right now, I'm using the concepts as a classical musician. And, you know, in this top picture in the orchestra, I would be sitting right here where this dude is. And obviously I'm a clarinetist. And so there's that. And I love this picture because it's the only one that I've ever seen with a clarinet that is actually a piece of clarinet music. And the geeky moment in me is saying, oh, this is the Howard Ferguson 5 pieces for clarinet. This is the clarinet part of the final movement, and this is the piano part of the third movement. All right, geeky moment now over. All right, so my professional life. And you may or may not know, I mean, if you read the information on the webpage, I do have a doctorate degree in music performance, but at the same point, I got my doctorate degree at the University of Washington, which is it's a school that's very much into research. And I had to write a full-length dissertation. Most performance majors don't have to do that, but I still had to perform 3 recitals. But I learned to love research, which is before I hated it. All I wanted to do was practice. And then I learned to dig deeper for truths. And that all came from my doctoral degree. But I also had 40 years as a music educator in college and public schools. There were times I'd go from a kindergarten class in the morning to a college class in the afternoon. And I would see some of the same behaviors between, I'm like, they don't really change a lot between kindergarten and college sometimes. And I performed professionally with orchestras and chamber groups And the best thing about this was it's all about collaborating and learning how to listen to all those people around you and to fit within what they were doing. You know, when you're in an orchestra, they put all the principal winds together so that you can listen. Okay, how did the flute player just play that? Okay, I'm going to play it exactly like the flute player did so that we match what we're doing. I mean, that is high level orchestral playing. The interesting thing is because of my dissertation, I designed methods of teaching that work for beginners. And it all came from my, you know, I did a pilot study. And then it was 16 years later, I actually did the dissertation. So I had 16 years to put what I'd seen from the pilot study to work. And people didn't believe me, like, well, how can you get a fifth grader to play in the altissimo register of the clarinet? Like, it's all in understanding what's going on inside the mouth while you play the clarinet. And I got so much pushback. But you have to push through that. I mean, anybody who is in academia, you're going to get pushback. And you can either buckle to it or you can work through it. But see, my musical training has brought me to where I am today. Even though I'm no longer performing professionally, all of these things that I've just talked about are helping me with what I'm doing right now. It'll be exactly the same with you. So I hope you take sign up for that special thing where you do the VIA character and passions, because you'll learn what your passions are if you don't. And the tongue, a creative force, I practiced what was in the book. Now, I did it before the marriage, but then remember, in the marriage, well, interesting. But then I put it to practice again, but on a higher level, as I had before that. In classical music, here's the thing that you see in classical music that really goes into everything else. Concepts are only learned with consistency. We have to be consistent to learn new habits. You know, like if you're practicing your scales, I mean, you can just, at first you think about it, but eventually they just come so naturally, you just start playing them. Good habits come with excellence of practice. There is a right and a wrong way to practice. And it's the same with what we're doing here as it is in music. And you learn to work with others and you learn to be creative in what you're doing. I mean, I'm presenting my bench of three here, and it's going to be different than yours because I'm not the same person as you. So all of this makes sense. And I'm bringing this slide back. If I want life to be different, I must see that life and death are in the power of the tongue. I consider that I carry the memory of my ancestors in my epigenetics, and every time something wonky comes up, I deal with it. And then I'm going to quickly agree with the adversary. And remember, the adversary is anything that is coming against you. Sometimes it's yourself and your stinking thinking, which in my case was a lot of it. But the other thing is, if I didn't do it, somebody in my ancestral line probably did. And then I go through that repentance process. I own it, renounce ties to it. You know, I own it on behalf of myself and my entire ancestral line. Then I crucify it, cover it with the blood of Jesus. If you want to leave that part out, fine. Then you can still, crucify it. Then you can trade it for the opposite. I did that all the time. But I understood that change starts with me, and I practiced changing my mindsets. All of these are part of how classical music functions as well. And the best part is we get do-overs when we mess up the first time. My marriage was a colossal fail. I would say pretty much 100% fail. I'm just going to call it for what it is, because I didn't handle it correctly. I let the lies rule me. So I mentioned a little bit in the last lesson that I had a do-over lesson, which eminent domain. And just so you get an idea, I live in Idaho. There's a beautiful picture of the state of Idaho. This little star is Moscow, Idaho, which is where I lived at the time, and I grew up there. My family's been there since 1920. I'm an Idahoan through and through. There's a picture of the map. There I am looking over the map. Oh, we were, and I'll explain this. So eminent domain, it took my house. This whole map was from the public hearing. And there I am looking at the project. Then we were given relocation papers. But the thing about it is, I figured it out because then this is where I started getting revelation into what was going on in the background from the spiritual perspective. You're seeing beyond what's in the natural. This is where the mystical piece comes in. And I tell a lot about that in the Transforming Mindsets book. I had to understand just compensation from a different perspective. And the state of Idaho, really, I could tell they weren't expecting us to completely read all of these things. Well, I did, and I took them up on everything. Then there was these legal battles that were going between the state and an environmental group. Now, I would take things to the courts of heaven. I'm not fighting man. I'm not, you're fighting mindsets. I wouldn't even consider it fighting. You're dealing with shifting mindsets, shifting the atmosphere so that things happen. And during this time, I would see things in the future and could speak to it. Now, I could go back and say, I wish I'd had this stuff during my marriage, but you know what? I wouldn't go back and change any of it because I don't think I would be where I am today without having lived through that interesting marriage. My growth in this. I knew the highway was supposed to go through on the route. This is the E2 route. They call it here the E2. This is from page 181 in the environmental impact statement that was over 1,000 pages. I was given a prophetic word in 2010. Oh, your life is like a highway. There's boulders and overpasses and trees in the background and blah, 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 blah. I had this picture in my mind that you're seeing on this screen in 2010. And when it shows up in the environmental impact statement, I just about went, ooh. My house, my old house, it's gone now, is about right there. I could either fight what God was showing me, or I could see what he had for me in it. I learned to partner with Creator, the angels, the cloud of witnesses are those people who've gone before us, and other beings during the relocation process. It was a mystical journey. And I don't know where you are with religious thinking, but I have to say that if this was not a good thing, then I wouldn't be where I am today. They're going to know you by your fruit. The fruit coming out of me is showing that what I've done has worked. I'll just leave it at that. The relocation to my new home set me on a path for what I'm doing now. It was during this whole process. And I didn't want to miss this maturing opportunity. I actually became a spokesperson for the state of Idaho in this. They couldn't understand why I was siding with them. But after reading the environmental impact statement, I knew that this is where the highway was supposed to go. Then I saw this picture. I'm just like, okay, this is interesting. Trials mature us if we let them. How are we going to respond in a circumstance? Wherever we are, we can either see the good or we can see the bad in whatever we're doing. It's a choice. Everything is a choice, and it comes out of what's in our heart. So here's some timeline of the eminent domain. In the beginning, it was in 2012, I learned I was losing my home. And the project went back and forth between the Federal Highway Administration, which is FHWA, PRDC is the Paradise Ridge Defense Coalition, and ITD is the Idaho Transportation Department. There was all this stuff going on between those three groups before the relocation process began, because the environmental group, which is the Paradise Ridge Defense Coalition, was suing the state every chance they could get, which is what was prolonging the whole thing. We were all allowed to go to a public hearing, and I stood up in front of a microphone and I talked, and I was the whole day, I was I was the first person anybody clapped for. But because of the fact that I was one of the people losing my home, and I got outside of myself and said, this is why the state has chosen this. I agree with it. There wasn't a whole lot that the naysayers could say. My final decision is God handpicked a home just for me once I came into agreement with his plan in 2019, and that's the house I'm in. My decision to come alongside the state's choice, came in 2014 after the environmental impact statement came out. My transformation. I went from this is a picture of my home on moving day, and I lived in a trailer on rented land. This is south of Moscow. The new highway, you can see the cell phone tower. This is called what is this called? Reisenhower Hill, named after a family that lived on the other side of it. I went to school with the Reisenhowers, so I know who they are. There's a big, they were going to fill this all in with 60 feet of dirt, and Ide Road is over here, and all of these trailers were going to be gone. Now, if you think about it, I lived in a trailer. How is it that I went from a trailer to this, where I am now, a stick house? Now, I had legislated in the heavens for a certain thing to happen, and the state had told me they were going to do some certain things. Now, they kept going back and forth and back and forth. And again, this is where my intention and my thoughts and my intents came into play. Because part of the just compensation is they have to act as if the taking never happened. There were certain things that the state had to do that I had to constantly remind them of. And because my situation was very different, because I was running a business out of my house, and you can't move into any trailer park and run a business out of a trailer park. This wasn't a trailer park. So that made a huge difference. But see, I had to understand the paperwork. I had to do my homework. And you may be in a very similar situation. And so this is in my backyard. You remember the door shed in the first one? Well, some of those doors are now in this shed. There was the original front door that's now painted yellow. And I call it the House of Dalit, and Dalit is the house of doors. So, we transform. Where I am in 2024, I'm healthier than I've been in over 30 years, and I've had no illnesses in the past 10 years. It's what I speak over myself every day. I'm much more secure in my identity, and I understand that I have a role in creation as a co-creator with God. I don't believe I can do this journey alone. And I embarked on a journey not even I could imagine was possible. I'm starting to see manifestations of the supernatural in my life in ways I never knew were possible. If you want to read about those, they're in all of my books, except for But Words Will Never Hurt Me. That's different. I would only read that book if you've been in an abusive situation. Otherwise, it might not be good for you to read it. How was all this possible? I had to realize that I was the problem. Every time that you look at where you are today, 99% of the reason you are where you are is by what's come out of your mouth, what you've believed, what you've thought, what you framed, and what you're acting. Hey, been there, done that, bought the t-shirt, wore it. There's no blaming anyone or anything else. We have to look at ourselves first. Now, we also have to remember that people will come and they will hurt you because of the hurt in themselves. I'm going to tell you a little story about this. Was in 2009, right before I began this journey. I had a job on the campus at the University of Idaho where I was working with a living group. And my two bosses sat me down in the living room the day of Christmas break. And for 3 hours, they told me what a slime bucket I was for 3 solid hours. Everything that they could say nasty about me, they did. And I sat there for 3 hours and said nothing. And it only made them madder. I did my best to keep a deadpan expression on my face because my thing was, I'm not going to accept this. I'm not going to accept this. I was already partially on this journey, but I also understood that what they were saying was out of their own frustration. I still can't understand it, but at the same point, when the whole conversation got done, they said, do you want to finish out the school year? I said, well, I can if you can. And they go, yes, we can. So I made it a point the rest of the school year, every time they came over, I greeted them at the door with a smile on my face and I welcomed them to the house. even after that 3-hour conversation. It drove them nuts, but I didn't care. I was going to release love over them. I was practicing because I knew that their screaming and hollering at me was about them. It wasn't about me. I was their punching bag that day. Now, it doesn't mean that I didn't have to deal with it, because I did. I had to, deal with some of the emotions I had from that. But here I needed to ask myself, what's my part in everything? Even in that screaming contest, I had a part. If I want a different result, what must I change? We have to, again, realize that God is in life situations. Everything that's going on around us, he's in it. We might not understand it because we're looking at from this plane, from this dimension, but we have to look higher than that. What's going on? What can we do to change? And sometimes it's simple as just show more love. And it might affect one or two people around you. Think like rabbits. They keep multiplying. Well, if we multiply love like rabbits multiply rabbits, then just imagine how much the world would change. Our actions and reactions are what directs how life situations play out. I learned to function out of my true identity. In my marriage, situations played out very negatively because of the how. My actions and reactions were all negative, but out of the relocation, they were all positive. So the situation was very different. We have personal responsibility in this. We can't rely upon the government, church, or family to meet our needs. And this is thinking outside the box. Is my income limited to my paycheck? That's an example. We must learn to accept responsibility for all our actions and reactions, despite if we're guilty of something or not. Remember, epigenetics says somebody in the family line could have done it, and you're carrying that memory. So if something comes at you that just feels from left field, then that's where I'd say, is this an ancestral thing? Then I go and I deal with that repentance process that I talked about earlier. We are responsible for mindsets that hold us captive because of trained habits. Every habit we've had, we've practiced it. If inner healing, seeing a therapist, all of that stuff isn't working, then it's time to try something new. And so that's some of the stuff I'm bringing in now. Now, I wouldn't stop doing some of that stuff. I would just add some other things to your bench of 3 of what you're getting from this 3-day challenge. And this is in bold, offense is a choice. What others hurl at us is often more about them than it is us. And they project onto us what they currently believe. And I just said I was working at a sorority. I won't tell you which one. And I was living at the sorority, I was 72 college women. And, the girls were great. It was just the bosses were interesting. At least that last year I was there. I changed bosses. And I still don't know what was going on, but I made some decisions. I made a choice not to be offended by their stupid words. Use the bench of 3 to adjust mindsets by setting up a protocol to shift the mindsets. You might have 3 or 4 bench of 3s that working all together in tandem. The spiritual bench of 3, the soul bench of 3, the body bench of 3, and they're all working in tandem. And again, you might do one thing right now for this challenge. And then when you take the challenge again, if you choose to do that, then you might add more things to it. And we have to check our attitude in circumstances. Until we understand our identity, we are too easily affected by life situations. These are things that people have said about us. You can't do this. You're not good enough to do this. And, I had an 8th grade teacher who told me I'd never be good at math. So guess what? I was never good at math because I believed her. It's the stupidest things that we come into agreement with. We have to come out of agreement with those. There came to be a point where I had sat there for 2 weeks and watched algebra videos to learn how to actually do algebra. I'm like, well, this is way easier than I thought it was, but I had a mindset that I couldn't do algebra. So what things have you said that you can't do? Well, reframe it so you can do it. I understood. Letting go of negative triggers takes practice. I make mistakes, so I must persevere, taking all small steps as a step forward. Be extremely consistent with my desire to keep focus on a co-creation process with source, creator, God, Yahweh, whatever, however you want to call him. Don't let setbacks keep us from moving forward. I made a lot of mistakes. Like I said, I am in a process now of looking at provision in a new way. So every time I find a penny or a nickel or something I never had before, I'm thankful that I'm one penny more, that I have one penny more today than I did yesterday. We have to look at the small things. Keep a positive outlook despite what we see around us. That's the hardest thing. That relocation process took 7 years. Every year, hurry up, you got to go start looking at houses. You're gonna get your relocation papers. Oh, we got sued by the environmental group again. Oh, it'll be another year. 7 years that went on. And it was during that time I grew the most. That's when I started recording the music. That's when all of the stuff started happening, because I looked at that situation from a positive perspective. And remember, everything in our life has a purpose. You have gifts, you have talents, you have hobbies, you have desires, you have dreams, and they were all put there by God. I don't care what anybody has said to you. They're there. Find them. So here's my bench of 3. I began spending time in my heart garden every day. I'd start every day going to the heart garden. I journaled everything that I sensed coming from Creator. You know, I mean, Murray Dewick says in his book, in If This Were a Dream, what would it mean? He goes, when he hears something, he goes, was that the pizza I ate last night? Or was that really from God? And sometimes it's those far from the left field things that just come at us that we think, oh, most of the time, those things are the things we should be paying attention to, that there's no way you'd have thunk them. I journaled everything that I sensed coming from Creator, which is even those things from left field. I listened to lots of teachings to build my spiritual senses, took notes, and I created exercises. You know, I actually, because I understand that our body is the temple, I created a Holy of Holies. I had an iridescent piece of fabric that I had. It was my closet. And I'd go in there and then I would have the outer court. Yeah, I literally created these spaces that I would move to through that, so that I could do a physical action to make it feel like I was going into these places. I was making it real in life as I was doing it spiritually. And I practiced seeing in the spirit to build a purified imagination that was void of negativity. So I did all of these things spiritually, which I'd never done before. You know, I mean, I practiced, reframing my words, but again, it was all heart knowledge. This spiritual thing brought it from head. I mean, sorry, that was all head knowledge. These things that I did here brought it from head knowledge to heart knowledge to get heart brain coherence. We have to have the two working together. So for the soul, I did the gateway cleansing. I did repentance on behalf of myself and my entire ancestral line every day as things came up. And I asked God to show me every time I negatively triggered, so I could deal with the trauma that was behind it. And sometimes it was a trauma, sometimes it was just something little. And we're going to start with the little things first, probably. I also listened to teachings and created exercises to deal with negative feelings about my identity. So all of the soul things were dealing with things I felt about myself, the way I believed about myself. All the soul had to do with me. My thought process is about me, about who I was. The spirit had everything to do with me building my spirit, spending time in love, making that connection, divine connection between me and Creator. Then the body, I was using flower essences and sound essences, because one of the things about flower essences, they help with the emotions so that it's a little easier to work through things. But I also spoke the decrees of physical healing over myself. I so much wanted to get rid of this funky tired. I called it the funky tired. And I mean, I literally for 19 years had to work around this, take naps about every 2 hours just so I could function again. And I started speaking decrees about myself coming into greater health. I didn't focus on this is how I feel. I focused on this is what I want to be. I reframed my mindset to see myself healed as if it already happened. I changed my mindset from negative to positive thinking about my physical body. And so now part of that is I'm speaking to my body. You walk in divine health. You are perfectly aligned. All the systems flow. Body, I love you. All of those things are part of what I'm doing with my body now, but I'm on a maintenance thing now because I'm not dealing with the trauma of what happened during the marriage. So was my initial bench of 3, and I've made adjustments to it as I've needed. How did I rescue my identity? It required understanding I can be me, not what others expect me to be. Our enemy is often ourselves. I had stinking thinking about what I thought of myself because I listened to what other people said. And I had to come out of agreement with that. And I learned to function from the stronger frequency of love. And I learned to function from my spirit instead of the soul. So my ruling factor is now the spirit, not the soul. And gateway cleansing, I'm fusing it with that perfect love. And I took inventory of what I love, my dreams and my passions, and what I do well. And I started putting my intention towards bringing some of those things to fruition. And I'm learning to let go of expectations. Remember, we get do-overs. And growing in your identity takes learning from life trials. Embrace every trial that you've ever gone through and ask, what can I learn from this? What have I learned from it? Here's your assignment. If you've not created your bench of 3 and posted it in Facebook group, go ahead and do it. Make lists of what you enjoy doing, what you dream about doing, and what you do well. Look for connections between everything on your list. What frequencies of thoughts, intents, and actions are you currently resonating with? How do they affect your life? List both positive and negative thought frequencies. Okay. Now, number 2. This is where the character and passions comes into play. So if you're not sure, really, number 2 is probably the one that you might want to do for this assignment. If you're not there, then you could do number 3. But really, we want you to help you find your identity. Again, list all your dreams in one column, list what you're passionate about in another column, list what you're good at in another one, list things that you've always wanted to do but never have done. Create some categories and just write things in those categories. And in the do well category, I would even put jobs that you hated, but you did them well. Like, for example, I sold cars for a while, which I hated doing, but I was really good at it. I wouldn't do it again, but I was good at it. So what about selling cars was I good at? Okay, that is a character trait. That is something that would go on my list. Okay. Remember the Facebook group. Post a response to one of the homework questions. Keep it short. Tell us about the forward motion you're making. And there's the link again. Hopefully you've joined by now, but you never know. Sources from this presentation. There's the link to Marie Duick's book, and there's the link to the tongue. I didn't list it quite right. And again, this special 3-day challenge. You get the Cloaked in Love, the Via Character and Passions, the Mountains, Gates, and Castles for $115, and it's normally double that. You can scan it with your phone, or you can click on this link right there. Click on this link, whichever you prefer. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And remember that the special deal ends on August 30th. And If you want to see what other courses that I have to offer, then click on this link right here because there's others in there. And if you want more of what I offer, this is my plug for me right now. Subscribe to my newsletter and my YouTube channel on Healing Frequencies Music. And you can purchase my music from iTunes. I think they call it Apple Music now. You can go to my website. You scroll down to the bottom and there's a link to my Apple Music page, and you can click on the samples and you can listen to the stuff there. I have several books on Amazon. There's a link to my author page, and sign up for a personal song sound bath or song of the month. And there is a link to all the personal music stuff. And I don't do a lot of advertising. My best advertisement is to have people share. If you like what you're seeing here, then share it with others. Eventually, this challenge will be available for purchase for anybody who wants it, including all of but only for the VIP people. I mean, sorry, at the VIP price, because it's going to include all of the recordings. If you just sign up for the regular one and want to add the VIP even this late, you can still do it. You're just going to get the recordings. It's going to be the same price. So just go ahead and go on to the website and sign up for that extra $50, and I'll make sure that you get all the recordings. So you don't have to wait for them to come out to be for everyone else. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen there. Okay, so the last thing before we end this is you have about a week to get all the homework done. This would be like August 24th, 25th when you're watching this, hopefully. So we want to try to get this challenge done by the end of August, hopefully the end of August, first part of September. Let's just say by Labor Day weekend, because the longer you go beyond that, the less of a chance that other people in the group are going to respond to you, because it's a challenge. A challenge is meant to be done during the challenge. So the best that you can, try to set aside your time to get the stuff done, which is one of the reasons you're getting all the recordings before the actual day of the challenge, is so that you have time to watch the video, put together your homework, post your homework on the next day, the actual day of the challenge. And those of you who are in the VIP, then you've watched the video before we actually do the VIP sessions. Anyway, that being said, I hope to see some of you in the next challenge. And if you have any questions, put them in the Facebook group and take advantage of the special. You get 50% off on those 3 classes, which all of them are done on your own time. They're self-paced. And you have my email, info@healingfrequenciesmusic.com. You can ask me questions and I'll answer simple questions. If you need some assistance, I do offer mentoring and coaching. That information is on the website as well. So there's a lot of ways that we can stay connected, but make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, because I put up all kinds of cool videos. And then I've got lots of blog posts that might explain some of the things about the frequency related stuff, our thoughts, intents, and if you're into this whole frequency thing, there's a lot more information in my blogs. So that's enough about that. And we'll see you the next time we do something bodacious like this. All right. Have fun.